Betrayal doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic flair. It whispers. It pats your shoulder with deceptive gentleness, promises we'll be right back, and walks away without a backward glance. I stood frozen in that Omaha International Airport terminal, watching my parents retreating back as they abandoned my grandfather, their own father, like unwanted baggage. The weight of their betrayal crushed against my chest, making it hard to breathe in the stale, recycled air. My name is Isla Thornhill. I was 20 years old when I learned what real love costs, and what it means to choose differently than those who raised you. In our polished Omaha home, I'd always been the perfect daughter. Straight A's decorating the refrigerator. Piano recitals with flawless performances. A scholarship to college that made my cardiologist father beam with pride at country club dinners. I was everything they wanted, quiet, obedient, invisible when convenience demanded it. But there was one person in our picture-perfect family who never quite fit into the carefully arranged composition, and that was my grandfather, Henry. While my parents measured love in achievements and social standing, Grandpa measured it in Sunday afternoon duck-feeding sessions and bedtime stories that stretched far past my official lights-out time. He was the only one who ever looked me in the eyes and said, "Isla, you don't need to earn love. You just need to be." I was 7 when he started calling me Izzy, a nickname that belonged only to us. When my parents attended their endless country club meetings, Grandpa would take me to Elmwood Park. We'd sit beneath this massive elm tree beside the lake, and he'd read the wind in the willows in his gravelly voice, occasionally pausing to point out a cardinal or ask what I thought Mole was feeling. His hands told stories of their own, scarred and weathered from 30 years teaching shop class at Central High School, but infinitely gentle when turning the pages of our shared books. "Tell me something beautiful you saw today, Izzy," he'd say during our walks, and somehow I always had an answer. A butterfly resting on Mrs. Pemberton's roses. Morning light capturing dewdrops on our fence. The neighbor's wind chimes singing in the breeze. As I grew older, those Sunday visits became my sanctuary. High school brought crushing pressures, maintaining my 4.0 GPA, winning piano competitions, crafting the perfect college applications. When the weight felt suffocating, I'd sneak upstairs to Grandpa's room. He never asked about grades or college essays. He'd just smile and say, "Tell me something beautiful you saw today," and for precious moments, oxygen would return to my lungs. Then Alzheimer's began stealing him away, piece by precious piece. At first, it was small things. He'd call me Izzy 3 times in succession, surprised each time I remained present. He'd lose himself in decades-old stories, repeating the same army anecdote or first-date memory with Grandma like breaking news. My father grew increasingly irritated. My mother started referring to Grandpa in past tense while he sat right there at our dinner table. I remember the night I truly understood what we were losing. I was 16, returning home from a brutal day of SAT prep and college interviews. I found Grandpa standing in our snow-covered driveway at midnight, wearing only thin pajamas and slippers, clutching a watering can. "The roses need water," he explained when I approached, his breath creating small clouds in the February air. "Your grandmother will be upset if I don't take care of her roses." Grandma had been gone 5 years. The roses had vanished when my mother modernized the landscaping. I gently took the watering can from his trembling hands. "Grandpa, it's Isla. It's night time. Let's go inside where it's warm." He blinked at me, confusion clouding his eyes before clarity flickered through like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Izzy? Am I dreaming?" "No, Grandpa," I said, wrapping my coat around his shoulders. "You're just remembering." That became our code. When present reality blurred and past memories felt more substantial than the moment we inhabited, I'd remind him, "You're just remembering." My parents called it a phase. Late at night, when they thought I slept, I'd hear them whispering about facilities and memory care units and what's best for everyone. But I couldn't bear the thought of Grandpa surrounded by strangers who wouldn't know that he hummed old Sinatra songs when anxious, or that he always stirred his tea exactly 3 times before the first sip. So I became his guardian in small ways. I'd sit with him evenings, reading aloud from the same books he'd once read to me. The Secret Garden, Charlotte's Web, The Wind in the Willows. He couldn't always follow the plots, but sometimes, God, those moments were like discovering buried treasure. His eyes would light with recognition, like he just opened a door he believed permanently locked. The summer after my high school graduation, we sat in our backyard beneath the big maple tree. My parents hosted another cocktail party inside, and I'd escaped to the quiet corner where Grandpa spent most afternoons now. He looked at me that day with the clearest eyes I'd seen in months and said, "Izzy, when they stop seeing me, promise me you won't." My throat tightened. "I could never stop seeing you, Grandpa." He reached over and placed his weathered hand over mine. "Then when the time comes, you'll know what to do." I had no idea what he meant then. Those words just lodged themselves deep in my chest like a promise I didn't yet understand. But I felt their weight, their importance. 8 months later, standing in that airport terminal, I finally understood. After my freshman year of college, everything at home felt rearranged, like someone had shifted all the furniture while I was away. The guest room where Grandpa stayed was suddenly locked during daylight hours. For his safety, Mom explained. "He needs his rest," Dad added. But I noticed how the hallway remained eerily quiet, how they stopped inviting him down for dinner, how they grew uncomfortable when visitors asked about him. He was disappearing from our family like an old photograph left too long in sunlight, fading until you could barely make out the edges. I pushed back in the small ways I could. I'd leave notes on his nightstand. "Good morning, Grandpa. Hope you have a beautiful day. Love, Izzy." I'd smuggle in lemon cookies from the bakery near campus, his favorites. I'd sit with him for hours, even when he stared out the window and called me Victoria, his late sister's name. But what hurt most wasn't his forgetting. It was theirs. One February afternoon, I overheard my father on the phone in his study. "Yes, I know the lawyer said she'll need to co-sign, but she's just a kid. We'll handle it." He was talking about me. After he left, I crept in and examined the papers scattered across his desk. Medical directives. Estate planning documents. Power of attorney forms. They weren't just preparing for Grandpa's decline, they were preparing to erase him from our lives entirely. That night, I confronted them at dinner. "He still knows me," I said, my voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. "He still smiles when I read to him. He still laughs when I accidentally burn the toast. He's still here." Mom didn't even look up from her salad. "Isla, you're being too emotional. You've always been too attached. You think love is enough?" Dad's voice was cold, clinical. "It's not. We're doing what's responsible." "Responsible?" The word emerged like broken glass. "You mean convenient." The silence that followed felt like ice water in my veins. From that moment, they excluded me from every conversation about Grandpa's care. I'd return from classes to find they'd thrown away his favorite slippers, donated his books, replaced the old kettle he'd used for his afternoon tea ritual. "Minimalism," Mom said brightly when I questioned the missing items. But to me, it felt like erasure. Then came the announcement that changed everything. "We're going to South Africa," Dad declared one evening over dinner, his smile too wide, his eyes too careful. "A family trip. One last memory together before." He didn't finish the sentence, but we all understood the implication. I glanced at Grandpa beside me, his fingers tapping an invisible rhythm on the tablecloth, something he did when processing information. He didn't seem to register the conversation, but when I leaned close and whispered, "Do you want to go on an adventure, Grandpa?" He looked at me and winked. It was small, but it was him. And so I agreed to the trip, not because I believed their intentions were pure, but because something deep in my gut warned me this wasn't just a vacation, it was a test. And I needed to be there when they failed it. We left for the airport before sunrise on a Tuesday morning. The sky still bled orange and pink, and the air carried that crisp March chill mixed with the metallic scent of jet fuel. Grandpa wore his navy cardigan, his travel sweater, he used to call it, buttoned wrong and hanging loose on his shrinking frame. He clutched a framed photo of Grandma in one hand and held my wrist with the other. Dad repeatedly checked his watch. Mom repeatedly checked her reflection in her compact mirror. I repeatedly checked Grandpa's eyes, searching for signs that some part of him understood what was happening. In the Lexus backseat, I whispered, "Are you excited about our trip, Grandpa?" He didn't answer directly, just stared out the window and hummed something I almost recognized, maybe an old military tune, maybe a lullaby. His thumb traced the edge of Grandma's photograph. "We're going somewhere warm," I continued softly. "There might be elephants." He turned to me then, his eyes focusing with effort. "You'll make a fine teacher someday, Victoria." I didn't correct him. He always called me Victoria when he was scared. The airport was chaos, endless lines, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the constant cacophony of boarding announcements and rolling luggage. Mom pulled me aside near the coffee stand. "Isla, get coffee for your father and me. Something strong. We'll need it for this flight." I glanced back at Grandpa. "What about him?" "He's fine," she said, already walking away. "We'll be right back." Dad guided Grandpa to seats in the quietest corner of the terminal, near a large window overlooking the tarmac. Grandpa sat obediently, still holding Grandma's photo, still humming that tune I couldn't quite place. My father leaned down, placed his hand on Grandpa's shoulder, and spoke clearly and slowly, "Just sit here. We'll go check in and come right back." The words echoed in my head like a stone dropped into a deep well. I stood frozen, the coffee order half-formed on my lips, and watched as my parents walked away, calm, confident, never once looking back. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Grandpa remained in his chair, waiting, trusting, occasionally scanning the crowd with hopeful eyes. 15 minutes. My heart pounded against my ribs like a caged bird. 20 minutes. Something cold and terrible settled in my stomach. I approached the check-in counter with shaking hands. "Has the Thornhill party already checked in for the South Africa flight?" I asked the woman behind the desk. She typed quickly, then nodded. "Yes, checked in and cleared security. Boarding should begin in about 20 minutes. My breath caught. "All of them?" "According to the system, yes." I backed away from the counter, numb. They weren't coming back. They had never intended to come back. 100 feet away, my grandfather sat alone in a sea of strangers, waiting for people who had already boarded their flight to a new life, a life that didn't include him. He didn't know what was happening. Didn't understand where he was or why the familiar faces had vanished. He only knew they'd said, "Wait for us," and so he waited, because that's what loyal people do. That's what love looks like when it's been betrayed but doesn't know it yet. I don't remember deciding to run. My body simply moved, muscle memory taking over as logic collapsed. The clatter of luggage wheels and departure announcements faded into white noise as I sprinted back toward that quiet corner where my grandfather sat. "Grandpa!" I gasped, dropping to my knees before his chair. "It's me. It's Isla." His eyes searched my face, recognition flickering like a candle in wind. "Victoria," he whispered, his voice dry and uncertain. "It's okay," I said, taking his cold hands in mine. "I'm here. You're not alone." He looked around the terminal, bewildered and increasingly agitated. Where did your father go? He said he'd come right back. Am I supposed to go somewhere? Did I forget something important? The questions hit me like physical blows. My throat felt raw, my eyes burned with unshed tears. No, Grandpa. You're not supposed to go anywhere. You're supposed to stay with me. That's all. He gripped my hands tighter, and I could feel him trembling. I was so scared, Izzy. I didn't know what to do. Everyone kept walking by, and I kept waiting, but nobody came back. I wanted to scream. Not at him, never at him, but at the people who had walked away so easily. The people who had packed their passports and printed their boarding passes and made peace with abandoning the man who had once carried them on his shoulders, who had taught them to ride bikes and stayed up all night when they had fevers. I stood up and gently helped him to his feet. Come on, Grandpa. We're leaving. He hesitated, glancing toward the security gates. Aren't we going on a trip? Yes, I said, wrapping his scarf around his neck with careful hands. But not the one they planned. As we walked toward the exit, I heard my name being called. Isla! I turned to see my mother standing by the escalator, her heels clicking against the polished floor, mascara smudged, phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. Dad stood behind her, silent and stone-faced. Isla, get back here right now, Mom snapped, her voice carrying across the terminal. I tightened my grip on Grandpa's arm. No. He doesn't even know where he is, she hissed, stepping closer. He needs professional care. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. I'm not leaving him like abandoned luggage in a waiting room. Dad finally spoke, his voice low and sharp. You're making a scene. Think about how this looks. How it looks. I almost laughed, but the sound came out bitter and broken. He's your father. The words hung in the air between us like a verdict. For a moment, none of us moved. The bustle of the airport pressed in around us, but our little circle felt frozen in time. Then I said it, quietly but clearly, you left him. Mom's lips parted, but no words emerged. Dad's jaw tightened. We're done here, I said, and turned toward the exit. Isla, if you walk away now, Dad began, but I was already moving, helping Grandpa navigate around other travelers, toward the sliding glass doors that led to freedom. The cold morning air hit us like a slap, but it felt cleaner than the recycled atmosphere inside. I hailed the first taxi I saw and helped Grandpa into the back seat, his hands still shaking. We drove in silence for miles, the airport shrinking behind us in the rear window like a bad dream dissolving in daylight. Only when we reached the Greyhound station did I finally exhale, really breathe for what felt like the first time in hours. Where are we going? Grandpa asked gently, his eyes cloudy but trusting. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through contacts until I found the number I'd saved months ago, the one I never thought I'd actually use. Martha Sullivan, my grandfather's younger sister, my great-aunt, the only person in our extended family who still sent birthday cards with handwritten notes. She lived on a small property outside Holton, Kansas, and had called me just after Christmas, worried about Grandpa. If anything ever happens, Isla, she'd said, you call me. Don't let them tuck him away somewhere to be forgotten. I dialed her number with trembling fingers. She answered on the second ring. Martha, it's Isla. Grandpa needs you. We need you. Her voice cracked. Oh, honey. Tell me where you are. I'll be waiting. I bought 2 bus tickets for the next departure to Kansas. The station was nearly empty, just us and a handful of other travelers starting journeys to places that probably meant everything to them. I helped Grandpa into a seat by the window, wrapped my scarf around his shoulders, and let him rest his head against my arm. He fell asleep before the engine rumbled to life, his breathing steady and peaceful. As we pulled out of Omaha, I watched the landscape change outside our window, city giving way to farmland, suburbs melting into open sky. I didn't feel lost anymore. For the first time in my life, I wasn't following my parents' carefully laid plans. I was choosing my own path. And that choice, terrifying as it was, felt like coming home. The bus pulled into Holton's tiny station just as the afternoon sun began sinking toward the horizon. It was quiet, almost unnaturally quiet after the chaos of airports and city traffic, but I welcomed the stillness like a warm embrace. Standing on the platform was a small, sturdy woman in a denim jacket, her silver hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, holding a piece of cardboard with Henry plus Isla written in shaky black marker. "Martha Sullivan," she said, dropping the sign the moment she saw us. "Oh, Hank," she gasped, rushing forward with tears already streaming down her weathered cheeks. Grandpa blinked at her, then smiled with more recognition than I'd expected. "Maddie," he said softly. She laughed through her tears. "Still remember that old nickname, huh?" He reached for her hand with surprising steadiness. "You got old." "And you didn't?" she teased back, wrapping him in a hug that seemed to restore something in both of them. For the first time in days, I felt myself truly relax. We drove down two-lane roads flanked by open fields stretching toward infinity under the biggest sky I'd ever seen. Martha's house sat at the edge of town, a modest two-bedroom with chipping white paint and a wide porch that looked like it had witnessed decades of stories. There was no paperwork, no intake forms, no discussion of burden or responsibility. Just warm soup, clean sheets, and the kind of silence that wraps around you like a comfortable quilt, not the cold, judging silence I'd grown up with, but something that felt like acceptance. That first night, I sat on the porch while Grandpa napped inside, finally peaceful. Martha brought out 2 mugs of chamomile tea and settled into the rocking chair beside me, her joints creaking like the old wood. "You did the right thing," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years and experience. "Even if they don't see it now. Especially if they don't." I nodded, though I hadn't told her everything yet. The story felt too raw to fully articulate. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," she added. "This house may be small, but it has room for people who see each other." I didn't cry then, I was too exhausted for tears, but something inside me unclenched for the first time in months. I stared up at the stars, clearer and brighter than I'd ever seen them in the city, and felt like they were actually looking back at me instead of through me. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I was craving. I helped with groceries and cooking, learned to tend Martha's small vegetable garden, took Grandpa for slow walks around the neighborhood when weather permitted. He didn't always know where we were, but he always held my hand, and sometimes he'd point out birds or flowers with genuine delight. Some days he called me Victoria, other days Izzy. And every now and then, rare, precious moments that felt like gifts, he'd look at me with completely clear eyes and say, "Isla," like he was seeing me for the first time all over again. Those moments were worth everything. I started keeping a journal, not for any class or assignment, but just to remember. I wrote down the things Grandpa said, the meals Martha cooked, the way the sunrise looked from the kitchen window. For the first time in my life, I was in a place where remembering was not just allowed but encouraged. By spring, I'd enrolled in a part-time nursing assistant program at the local community college. Not because I'd planned it, but because something inside me had shifted, like a compass finally pointing toward true north. Caring for Grandpa no longer felt like sacrifice, it felt like inheritance. One warm afternoon in late spring, I was pushing Grandpa's wheelchair through Martha's small backyard when he suddenly turned to me, more lucid than he'd been in weeks. "You're doing good, Izzy," he said, his eyes bright and focused. "Real good." I knelt beside his chair, overwhelmed by the gift of his clarity. "I wish I could have done more sooner." He shook his head slowly, deliberately. You did the one thing that mattered most. You stayed. Grandpa passed away on a Tuesday morning in early summer. I found him in his favorite chair by the window, hands resting peacefully on the quilt Martha had made him, the radio playing soft jazz in the background. His framed photo of Grandma sat on the table beside him, exactly where he'd placed it every morning for months. His eyes were closed, his face serene, like he'd simply dozed off listening to his favorite song. I didn't cry at first. I just sat beside him, held his still warm hand, and whispered, "You can rest now, Grandpa. I'll remember the rest for you." A week after the funeral, I made the drive back to Omaha. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I needed to close that door for myself. I stood on the porch of my childhood home, rang the doorbell, and waited. The house looked smaller somehow, like a stage set after the curtains had fallen. Mom opened the door, her eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been relief. Isla. She looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. Dad appeared behind her, arms crossed but not defiant, just tired. "I heard," Mom said softly. "About your grandfather." I nodded. He passed peacefully, surrounded by people who loved him. She looked down at her hands. "We didn't mean for things to happen the way they did." "Yes, you did," I said gently, without malice. "You meant to leave him at that airport. And you would have done the same thing to me if I hadn't chosen differently." Dad stepped forward. "He didn't remember you most days toward the end." "It wasn't personal." "It was never about what he remembered," I replied. "It was about what I refused to forget." I turned to leave, but Mom caught my wrist. "Isla, will you come home?" I looked at her then, really looked, and saw not the composed society wife I'd grown up with, but a woman who'd built her entire life around control and appearances and now stood in the hollow center of that construction, finally understanding what it had cost her. "I am home," I said quietly. "In Kansas, with people who knew how to love me before I had to earn it." Back in Holton, I returned to my studies, my patience, and the porch where Grandpa used to sit watching the world go by. I kept his photo on my wall, right beside my nursing certificate when I finally earned it. And every night, before sleep, I'd whisper to the stars, I didn't let go. Because in choosing him, I'd chosen myself. I'd chosen love over loyalty, truth over convenience, staying over leaving. And that choice, terrifying and uncertain as it was, had led me to exactly where I belonged. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally teach us the most about conditions. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, we also learn that love doesn't have to be earned, it just has to be recognized, honored, and fiercely protected. That's a lesson worth remembering. Thanks for listening, and if you liked this story, share it with others who might need courage to choose love over convenience, and don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about the moments that transform us into who we're meant to be. Sometimes our greatest acts of defiance become our most profound acts of love.